So Zach, thanks again for joining us on the Leaders of Tomorrow podcast. Why don't we go back to before Student Works, explain what you were like.
For sure. And first of all, thanks for having me back. And it's great to meet up and do this in person.
It is
I
so
think
much
we
fun.
did the last one like during the pandemic.
Yes.
And you've got an amazing setup here. So
Yeah, thank you.
thanks for hosting this. I joined StudentWorks in my first year of undergrad. So I was 18 years old, fresh at McGill University. Before that, I had, been a strong student at school. I had been, ambitious in different ways. I would go really deep on school projects. And I guess I had been interested in business, but I hadn't really had the language to say that business was what I was interested in. I was interested when people came out with new products,
Right.
or, a new brand of store opened up in our neighborhood.
Right.
I was kind of interested, how did these things work?
Right.
But I think Student Works really gave me an opportunity to explore that and understand, like, what's it like to actually start a business for the first time.
Right. And so what do you still use from your time at Student Works?
Yeah. So my role now is leading ChargeLab as the CEO. And I think the first one that's really major is learning how to deal with rejection.
Right.
Like, my job, the most important parts of my job are attracting great talent
Right.
to build this company, getting money in the bank,
Right.
and bringing on customers.
Right.
Right. And all of those things are basically, you could say, going down a street, knocking on doors, getting a lot of no's, looking for the yes.
Right.
And so whether it's recruiting our next great, VP or our next great salesperson,
Right.
there's a lot of amazing opportunities in the market. And so a lot of candidates say no. And we want to go after and convince the best people to say yes. Whether it's investors, that's even more so, like knocking on the door and continue
Yes.
getting the no. We've been fortunate enough to raise a substantial amount of venture capital funding. But I think one of the things that people don't understand is, in order to get our 2 or 3 rounds of venture capital financing done, I met with over 200 investors.
Yeah.
And in the end, I got 3, 4, 5 yeses.
Wow.
Which is a similar hit rate to when you're at Student Works and you're
Canvassing.
Yes.
Yes.
And so, I mean, that's one thing that stands out, is just learning how to deal with rejection and turn it into actually, every time someone says no, you're just that much closer to finding the right person for your business who's going to say yes.
Right. Right. Was it more of a challenge, especially in that venture financing? Did you make it mean more, or were you able to manage your mindset around that, Zach?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the venture financing, there's one thing going on the first time, because
Right.
generally you don't have an expensive team before you have any funding. You
Yes.
have bootstrapping. And so that was the first few years of the business. We were building the business without any funding. And so the first time it was just imagining, okay, where could we go if we did get this funding? But after the first round, you get into this cycle, which everybody in the venture world is familiar with, which is you're going to raise a little bit of money, you're going to increase your spending, and you're going to need to raise again and again. And that becomes quite stressful, because your head is on the neck to really, keep these people employed, to keep the project going,
Yes.
to reach your next milestone. And I think that's really where that experience of how to really handle rejection well came in. And honestly, I think a lot more people would found these types of companies if they could handle that kind of, canvassing, people saying no, but trying to find, okay, why are they saying no? How can I improve my pitch for next time?
Right.
And so it's just so indispensable, this ability to, take the no as something positive and then tailor your pitch better for the next one.
So when they said no, did you ask? Did you get feedback? Was the feedback helpful? Was sometimes they just looking for an investment in another area? But tell me about that process.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I always ask for feedback.
Okay.
I think that's another thing that I first started doing at Student Works
Yeah.
is, it's a very feedback driven program and experience. But I always ask for feedback, what could the pitch improve? Venture capitalists, VCs, are kind of notorious for, just saying, oh, it's not the right time, but like,
Yes.
come back to us in,
Right.
6 months. And you're like, oh, I need the funding now.
Yes.
And so there's certainly a lot of that. But actually, that's the VCs that I have the best relationships with are the ones who gave me honest and candid feedback.
Yes.
And in fact, our first major seed investor was somebody who I had met almost 12 months prior.
Okay.
They had said no at the time. They had said, like, look, Zach, you've got a great idea here. But basically, we don't think you have the right bench. You don't have the technical leadership to pull this off. And in that year, I actually went and found a co-founder, a technical co-founder, Hassan.
Yes.
He actually found me. I was very lucky in that regard.
Right.
But we got working together. We improved many other parts of the business, and we went back, and they essentially said, yeah, like these things that we told you were missing are now here. We're ready to invest.
Okay.
And they put the $1.5 million seed check into the company.
Right.
That ultimately led to a much larger round of funding and kicked everything off. And so, I think not everybody's going to give you the candid feedback, but you should be very grateful when you do. And the people who do give you the feedback, you should stay in touch with, because, you can always come back to them and they might give you feedback again, or they might say yes the next time around.
Yeah. And really, in many ways, with time, you look back and you go, wow, they were right? Like I did need that.
Of course.
Right?
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah. Were you aware that you needed that technical experience, that co-founder?
Yeah. I was aware that we didn't have all of the ingredients.
Okay.
Part of the idea was like, let's attract the funding so that we can go find the ingredients.
Got it.
But it was a great mindset shift of like, you know what, let's be scrappy. Let's go get everything we need and then go back and ask for funding.
Okay. And so why don't we kind of jumped into, obviously, and we jumped in because it is the most fun part of this is ChargeLab. So what had you think about this space coming out of StudentWorks? You've got managing experience, you've got leadership experience, you can sell, you can market, you can recruit people. What had you thinking about this space?
Yeah, so I left StudentWorks in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
I had the great opportunity to become a district manager.
Yeah.
And so I was with the company after I graduated McGill, was doing district manager full time. But then I left in 2015 and I was really interested in technology. I wanted to start a technology company.
Right.
And I was living in Montreal at the time, but came down to Toronto and did a startup accelerator program, actually did a couple of programs. And ultimately, ChargeLab was not born out of those programs, but between my experience running not only my own business, but helping run many franchises with StudentWorks and seeing a little bit how to start to scale a business. Of course, not the scale that you've achieved now, but
Right.
we were really starting to grow the StudentWorks business around that time, 2015.
For sure.
And then kind of doing these startup accelerators and see how these technology companies are put together. I realized a couple of things. Like, one, this is going to be super hard, so you should do something that you're like deeply interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just getting really like, at the end of the day, I'm a tech geek and a tech nerd, and you knew it back at StudentWorks,
Exactly.
And I was just really getting into electric vehicles. But I think the other thing is, timing is so important to making a business successful.
Yes.
I think there were other areas that I was excited about, but that are still 10 years out today. And there are other areas that the ship had already sailed,
Okay.
right? So I think by 2015, like starting a social network was probably a bad idea because, Instagram was here, Facebook was here, obviously TikTok has been added, so it's not impossible, but it's very hard. And then likewise, if you want to do kind of an advanced bioengineering or space technology company, that's probably a decade out in the future too.
Right.
But electric vehicles were something that was really, hitting or it looked like it was going to hit the time. 2015 was still very early. And the other idea was that most people tend to focus on kind of the front end trend, or the new iPhone, the new Tesla, things like that. But from some of the other startup programs, I had really started thinking about infrastructure and back end technology. And so I was looking at electric vehicles, thinking about, okay, if there are millions of electric vehicles on the road, how are we going to refill them and power all of them? And so that's where the idea came to, build a software that would help manage and facilitate all of that charging. And so ultimately incorporated the company in 2016, which was literally, 18 months out of StudentWorks.
Right.
We didn't raise the venture capital funding in 2016. We didn't do that till 2020 when Hassan had joined.
Okay.
But it was 4 years of, hitting the ground, bootstrapping, finding customers, selling charging stations, understanding, okay, if you have this device, what kind of software would you need? And we really uncovered this opportunity to be the, network operation software. And just, the quick refresher on what we do. We build a software to connect EV chargers along the highways, in condo buildings, in apartment buildings, and office buildings. And so if you have an electric vehicle and you live in a condo building in Toronto, you'll pull up, we'll take care of all the billing and payments. So you can pay for your charging station, your condo building can get the fees, and you can go on your way. And we do the same thing all along the highway. We're all over the US and Canada doing this now, over 10,000 stations managed.
Right.
But it all started from that, curiosity in this rising trend of electric vehicles, and also a passion, I should say, for climate, right? I wanted to work on something that had a really positive impact.
Yes.
What you've done for your whole career and your whole life has been incredibly mission-driven.
Mission-driven, yes.
Your mission has been empowering the next generation.
Exactly.
I was part of the next generation for you, and my mission is, okay, we got to clean up, we got to clean up the environment for the generation after that, for Devin's kids, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you touched a bunch of things. So one of the things, you actually were part of our organization as a coach, now we call coach, where we really did see big growth. And I know one of the things I saw from you as well, Zach, is you were a natural systemizer. You actually started to, again, help systemize. That's something that I'm not really good at. Now we've had a whole bunch of other people who are really great at that. Patrick Lalonde, my son, and others who yourself, Fraser Lachance, who have gone and really helped systemize our business and make it better and better. And obviously that's a big part of ChargeLab. The other thing about ChargeLab is your people won't necessarily know the brand, right? And maybe you can talk about that. So it's kind of like the brand ChargeLab won't necessarily be what people know of because you've chosen a different strategy.
Yeah. We want to be the back end rails powering everything.
Right.
But we recognize that that's going to be partnering with a lot of other folks. And so actually an example here in Ontario, the largest public charging network other than Tesla is called the Ivy Charging Network. Mm-hmm. And this is a joint venture between two of the utilities in the province. And it's really important for them to have their brand.
Yes.
Right? They want to be known for reliable charging spots. They do all the en routes along the highways.
Right.
And we provide them ultimately a tool to run their business, which is the software to manage all their users and collect payments and do all of those things.
Right.
And so that's the vision for ChargeLab, is that we want to be behind the majority of the charging sessions that happen in North America. We're not there today, but that's the vision. We really think that we can be, the Android of EV charging. We can be the back end software powering all of this. But we recognize that other people are going to put their brand in the front lines. And we're totally comfortable with that. In fact, we promote it, and we're excited to have big partners that we can help, power their business.
Right. And so, and part of that is strategic alliances. So, did you think of that strategy? Where did you start to think about that? Was that in some of the incubators as a strategy, or where did you think about that?
Yeah. So, I really thought about this analogy, and no analogy is perfect, right? Because our software is a paid product and Android is free, but Google actually monetizes from getting you to use their search engine, which is preloaded with Android.
Yeah, and that's how they make their money.
And then on the iPhone, they actually pay to be the default there.
Yes.
Quite a lot of money to Apple.
Yeah.
But I said, look, we want to be the Android of EV charging. Well, if you're going to be Android, it's probably a good idea to identify who's going to be Samsung and Huawei and Motorola and HTC and build a good partnership. Yeah. And so we looked around and said, who's going to make the EV chargers?
Right.
And there's some really strong existing technology companies like ABB and Siemens and Eaton. Yeah. And we said, hey, we want to partner with those guys.
Right.
And so for years, we went out and aggressively went after building partnerships with these guys. And there's a couple things that went into that. I think one big one is bringing value to the table, right? Obviously, these bigger partners can help your business because they have reach and scale and a brand, but how are you going to help them?
Yes.
And so we were hyper-focused on explaining what we did really well, which was software, and how we could help them in this area that was just not their strength, which is becoming a software company or bundling software. And so we had a very, customer-focused pitch, and we brought it to these folks. And another thing that we learned, so we have many partnerships that are purely customers, and we love those, and they bundle our software and they resell. And we're not going to give anybody special treatment because they're an investor. So we work with many companies that compete with our investors.
Right.
But we also had the opportunity to bring ABB and Eaton in particular onto our cap table as strategic investors.
Wow.
And we thought that would just align incentives. It would get us deeper in with their product teams. Yes. And it has. But I think one thing we've learned in that process is for anybody who might be starting a business and thinking about having a strategic investor, you really got to put the commercial partnership first.
Yeah.
And then the investment after.
Yes.
We've really learned that the way that the investment relationship makes sense is if you figure out all the, how does it make money for you to partner with ChargeLab and put our software on your chargers?
Right.
And so we figured that out with these partners, and then we did the investment after.
Right.
And that's been a really good recipe for success. But I've seen it go sideways the other way, where you do the investment first and then assume that the whole commercial partnership is going to work out. But in reality, the investments and the commercial side are managed by different people. So we really learned to put the commercial partnership first.
Right.
And then it's a win-win, right?
Yes.
They have a product that helps them, bring their solutions to the market because they're selling EV chargers. They need software. And then as we deploy together, the value of our company increases and their investors. And so it's really a win-win-win all around. And I think in business, I'm really focused on, how to make it a win-win, right?
Yeah.
And again, goes back to our customer, the IV charging network. Another version of ChargeLab could have been us trying to go and acquire all the best sites in the country and install our own chargers. But we said, hey, that's not our expertise. We're not real estate people.
Yes.
We're not utilities. Let's partner with them and provide our technology, and they win and we win. And that's how we love to do business.
Well, the other thing as well is it sounds to me like, Zach, you were early in the market. Okay. Right. And kind of not really eating, right. You went through a lot of your savings, you made a lot of money, you had money, and then it took a long time. Now, one of the interesting things about big companies like ABB, et cetera, they make decisions over long scale. So they're not going to jump into, wow, this sounds really great. 6 months later, they're into a partnership arrangement. So the fact that you're there a long time, I'm sure that also makes a difference too.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. With ABB, I met them within the first 6 months of starting the company in 2016. We signed a formal, commercial partnership in 2020, and they completed their investment at the end of 2021, beginning of 2022. So it was a multi-year journey. And yeah, I mean, you bring up something good, which is to all the folks who might be listening who want to start a tech company. Yeah. There's certainly many paths. You can get funding on day one. You can never get funding. Some of the entrepreneurs I respect the most build similar companies to mine, but they don't have any outside funding and they've totally bootstrapped it, and you have total control. And that's an amazing path to take. But yeah, to be very clear, the path that I took, and to tie it back to StudentWorks as well, I had the opportunity to be a coach, earned more than I think your average, 23 or 24-year-old would. Didn't spend it all in Mexico on the parties. Exactly. And that was really helpful because, literally the first few years of the company, there was no salary coming out. Yes. Any revenue we made was being reinvested in the product. Yeah. And so, I was on the ramen diet building this company. But it was actually the StudentWorks program that enabled me to do that, because otherwise I would have had to, go make money, work for 5 years and then go after my startup dreams.
And what do you think about that? Like the go sooner versus go later? But a lot of people talk about, I'm going to go later to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to get things established. How do you look at those choices?
Yeah, I mean, I would think about it as in a couple of ways. Like, first of all, I would think about overlapping skill sets. And so in general, I think going later is better advice. Right. As someone who started this company quite young. Okay. But you should be doing, if you want to start a tech startup, you should be working at tech startups, right? Or if you want to start a business, you should be doing the StudentWorks program and learning how to run a business over one summer. Right. Like, that's going to be way more valuable than doing an internship at a bank or something. Right. Of course, if you want to be an investment banker,
that should be a
you
good
should
spot.
Be doing an internship at a bank, right?
Third summer, do an internship at a bank.
Yeah. Yes. So I think about those overlapping skill sets, and so the extent that you can go get real practical experience. Like, if you want to be a startup founder, go work with an early stage startup and work directly with a CEO and see everything that they're going through. I think is an important thing. And then, sorry, there was a second part of that question too.
Really, just to me, and you tell me if you think I'm right. Like one of the big things that people need to understand about entrepreneurship is entrepreneurs get paid last.
Yes.
And so they need to be able to, like you said, eat ramen for a long time.
Yes.
And just suck it away. I'm not going to get wealthy.
Yes.
Initially, mostly most entrepreneurs, if they win it, they win it late. They win it later, and they just suck it back in the business. They're lower quality of life. You live like a student to finally all of a sudden, wow, look, this worked. Right.
Yeah.
And you're still, and sorry, not to cut you off, Zach, but you're still a long way from, I don't know this, but I imagine on paper, you're quote unquote wealthy, but that's just on paper. Absolutely. It's a long way from any executed wealth.
We have far from realized the vision of ChargeLab. We have a long way to go. And it feels like every day is still day one. Mm-hmm. Because as you go along, the problems don't get any easier. The stakes just get higher.
Yes.
And so I feel that every day. But I think I remembered what I was going to add there. And you were kind of asking about like, when should someone start into this? And you're absolutely right. There's a lot of eating ramen, not taking a salary. This is a contrarian belief, but I actually don't really believe that people make a calculated decision to start a business. I think the only real rational reason to start a business is because you can't stand not to.
Yeah.
Right. You just can't, you can't stand, not having control over the vision or what you're working on. Mm-hmm. Or in the world of startups, you've got a problem that is just so painful for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That you cannot imagine going through life another day without at least trying to solve this problem.
Yeah.
And so I would say for folks who are, kind of saying like, well, these are all the things that I could do next. And one of them could be starting a company. I think you're not quite there yet. I think you need to go get itchier. You need to really experience a problem so deeply that you can't stand but like get off the couch and like go solve it. And so I think that's what drives people to be entrepreneurs. And I think that also relates to the Student Works program, because when I did it, I had been, I gave the brief intro at the beginning, but I had another interesting experience, which is in high school, we had done an expat in China.
Yes.
So I had grown up in Ottawa, lived in Beijing for 4 years, and then come back to McGill University. And so I just had a different kind of perspective on the world. And I just could not see myself, going and doing the internship that my other classmates were doing.
Right.
I just couldn't get around to it. And so when this opportunity came up, I said, I don't know what I want to do. But this sounds a lot closer to it than anything else that's on the table right now.
Right. Yeah. And something you could really dig your teeth into, which you did really, really dig your teeth into. I remember your first summer, we have this Mexico target that is very, very challenging to get. And Zach was well off that target and just dug in to work so hard over the last number of weeks to go and make that target. And again, it's like that makes you different in many ways. I'm sure you experienced and learned a lot about yourself during that period, that first summer.
Yeah, I mean, I think I learned a lot during all 4 summers I did it.
Yes.
Two as an operator and 2 as a coach. Mm-hmm. And I am very grateful for that experience now, because your business is so successful now that I'm sure that graduating from being an operator to a coach after 2 years is not.
It's not normal. No,
it's not normal anymore. But I was. This is all timing, right? I was lucky to be at the business that I was in Quebec. It was a time that we were growing Student Works in Quebec in a meaningful way. So I learned a lot from, running my own small business for the first time. Mm-hmm. That was the first summer. Yeah. From running a business that I actually understood and deeply knew. Yeah. The second summer, it's one thing to run a business from scratch. It's another thing to say, hey, I know how this works. I'm going to do it better. Yeah. The second year. And then obviously becoming a coach and learning to work with others, developing EQ and all of these skills of how to impart what you've learned onto others. Yeah. No, it was very transformative. I really have no regrets about it. At the same time, I don't think I could have ended up doing what I'm doing now if I had not done this program. I would have had to graduate and then go get some entrepreneurial experience working at a startup or shadowing another entrepreneur. But I was lucky enough to actually do it myself for those 4 years.
And so what's the biggest challenge that ChargeLab's facing right now?
Yeah, the biggest challenge that we are facing right now, I would say, is being in an industry that is just moving so
So
fast.
fast. Yeah.
Yeah, the needs of customers are changing day to day. Like, I'll give you an example. 12 months ago, a little bit more than that, 18 months ago, um, there was basically two standards in the industry. You can think of it about it like the Apple Lightning cable and the USB-C cable.
Okay.
And Tesla had their own plug and everybody else had a plug. And all the standards and products and everything was built around that. And then everyone else said, you know what, we don't like this open plug. Tesla's going to open source theirs and we're going to use the Tesla plug. And now everybody in North America is moving to the Tesla plug.
Okay.
And so that has huge ramifications on
All your software.
our software, how chargers get installed, all
Yes.
of that stuff. At the same time, it's like we're clearly building the future, and this is something that so many businesses need, so many condo buildings, office buildings. Everybody's going to need a charger
Yes.
in the garage. At the same time, like the excitement is so high, and then the reality of like, hey, you actually have to get electricians on the ground and get a permit and run cables.
Yeah.
So it takes time to build out this infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so the requirements are changing, and then there's certainly exponentially growing demand, but it doesn't come all where you expect it and all at the same time. And it's like, well, we're going to do this great project for 200 chargers at this, fleet depot in Quebec. And it's like, oh, actually Hydro-Quebec delayed the permit. And so that's going to happen 6 months later than we thought. And so you're trying to forecast growth of the business and you have all of these different things. And I think it'll stabilize over time as every business does.
Right.
But I think those are some of the challenges we deal with today.
Right, right. And then, one of the things as well is what I know reading a bunch of what you're doing and the problems that you're solving, but on the ground, maybe describe some of the complexities of working in an environment and why the software that you're doing makes such a big difference to even out the power, et cetera.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that our software does, but I think there's three big ones. One is monetization. So these EV chargers don't have a credit card reader on them by default, and if you put a credit card reader on them, someone still needs to manage that credit card reader.
Right.
And so it's just so essential that if you're installing an EV charger along the highway, you want to collect revenue.
Yes.
And that's just something we immediately unlock with the software, whether it's accepting a credit card or having an app that you can pull out and pay. We build all of these solutions and we provide them all. So monetization is key. But the other one you hinted at, the second category is power management.
Yes.
So, anyone listening to this who's an electrical engineer or civil engineer understands this. For the rest of us, we never thought
No
about
clue.
this.
Exactly.
But if you've ever owned an older home and you want to put in a big speaker system or a hot tub in the backyard, sometimes you'll come and say, actually, there's a power constraint issue here.
Right.
Like this was a home built in 1960. It was not expecting a heated pool outdoors, right?
Right.
And that takes a lot of power.
Yes.
And so sometimes you have to upgrade the service. The same thing is true in commercial buildings. Generally speaking, apartment buildings, office buildings, fleet depots were not designed for electric vehicles.
Yeah.
And so you got enough power for the lights and the air conditioning and the monitors and all of that stuff. But EVs pull a lot of power when they're plugged in.
Yeah.
And so if you were to install 50 EV chargers at a site, often it doesn't have enough power. But what our software will do is we can take a site that, let's say, could only install 10 EV chargers. We'll put in the 50 EV chargers, and depending on how many people are plugged in, we'll schedule and turn people up and down. And that actually works really well because charging your EV is a lot more like charging your phone
Right.
than filling up a gasoline car. You kind of plug it in at the end of the night and it just needs to be full by the morning.
Yes.
And so we've got this big 12-hour window to fill up the car. And so we can actually deal with constrained infrastructure really, really well with software. As long as people are charged up by 6 a.m., 7 a.m.
Everyone's happy.
Earlier for you because you go to the gym first thing, but for most people are fine by 8 a.m.
Exactly.
And then I think that the third thing that we do is just kind of situational awareness, right? You are a utility installing hundreds of these chargers. You need to know what's going on. Where are people using the chargers? Where are people not using the chargers? Is there a broken component?
Right.
We do all of that, and this is where we're really starting to innovate in an interesting way with layering on artificial intelligence
That's what I was going to ask next.
to
Yeah.
monitor the whole system. And so that's the fun thing that we've been working on this year.
Right. And how's that changed, and how do you expect that to change ChargeLab in the ensuing years?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk, broadly about AI as well, which is AI is very much, and you lived through this, it's very much like the internet in 1999,
Yes. Yeah.
where this was so obviously going to change the world. it was just not exactly clear how.
Yeah.
And so you had businesses like Webvan and Pets.com that were going to like sell you pet goods and deliver your groceries online. That totally flopped.
Yeah.
You had businesses like Amazon that went on to become one of the most successful businesses in the world. And it was very hard to tell in 1999. And it also comes back to timing because like we have Webvan now. It's called Instacart, right?
Yes.
It's just they were, you know,
Too
25
soon.
years too hard.
Yes.
Like it was, the logistics was not possible to solve.
Yeah.
The demand on the web was not there.
Yeah.
And so I think the analogy is that that's what AI is like today. Like you are going to see a lot of AI tools built out. A bunch of them are going to flop, and a few of them are going to become the next, you know, Amazon, Google, Facebook, you know, from the ground up. In terms of how we apply it to our business, we are dealing with a lot of data, you know, coming in. We connect thousands of devices. Our goal is to connect millions of devices long term. And we're getting all sorts of signals. When somebody starts charging, when a charger detects that the temperature is kind of hot, you know, when the humidity changes. And so we want to ingest all of these signals. And there's too many signals for a human to sift through.
Right.
But one of the things that AI does really, really well is compare a whole bunch of data and say, hey, there might be something weird going on at this site. And so we're applying AI specifically to charger monitoring and maintenance. Because at the end of the day, what EV drivers want is they just want to charge their car.
For sure.
They don't need any bells and whistles. It's like, imagine with a gasoline car, if you went to the gas station and, you know, 1 in 10 times you plugged in the pump, you pumped it, and nothing came out.
Not so good.
That's kind of where we're at with EVs.
Oh,
like
really? Okay.
Yeah, there's like a higher than 10% failure rate across the industry.
Wow.
And, you know, you can unplug it, replug it, restart the software. But we got to get to like a 99.99% reliability rate. And one of the ways we're doing that is trying to detect problems in advance with AI. But I think, you know, it's so critical to think about how this is going to impact your business. At the same time, you have to take a really long-term view and say like, you know, this is like the internet. It's going to transform everything. But, you know, doesn't mean that everything that uses AI is going to be a big hit.
Right, right. And so when we think about AI, like I've read and heard that it's really impacting, you know, software and making it easier to write software and making people more efficient. Are you seeing that with your 70 team members?
Totally. So we use Copilot and other tools like that, which help software developers write software.
Okay.
And the way to think about this is as a tool. You know, I don't think that software developers are going to become redundant, that salespeople are going to become redundant, that customer service agents are going to become redundant, at least in the short term. Like all of these areas, I think long term, you know, we could all be the horse riders. I'm not just talking about customer service, but developers and salespeople too. But in the short term, what changes is now instead of your customer support agent that can do 10 tickets per day, that same agent can do 40 tickets per day.
Wow.
And have an easier time doing it, have less stress, have a more enjoyable time at work, deliver a higher customer satisfaction. You know, we're not going to, you know, need fewer developers, but the developers who are working on the project can deliver a lot more, and more accurately. Because the thing that AI does really well is kind of spotting bugs and spotting human error. And so much of software development is actually human error, right? How do we detect bugs and issues in the code? And so we're totally applying AI to our development process today.
Right.
And again, I think it's on us to always be experimenting with the newest tools, figuring out what works, but not get distracted and say, oh, there's this new tool, we have to use it.
No.
Look, if it adds value to the developers, we're going to pay for it, we're going to give them a license, and they're going to run with it. If they're like, Zach, this is not useful, great, keep doing things. And there's a new tool coming every month, every 6 months, you know, even more frequent. And so we just got to stay on top of all of that.
Yeah, it's kind of not being chasing the squirrel, and on the other hand, looking at the squirrel because the squirrel could help us. That one could be really valuable. So when you look at your 70 people, how many are engineering? How many are in sales? You know, what's the breakdown?
Yeah, I would say, you know, our company is very product and technology
That's what I
focused.
figured.
So about 45 people on our team are either product managers who are a little bit more customer-facing technical role, or developers who are directly developing. And developers are customer-facing too. They care a lot about customer problems. They talk to customers. But yeah, the majority of team is in technology. We also have an interesting sales strategy where we partner and we go through channel partners. And so I think to bring it back to the, you know, the student works world, you know, we're a lot more Well, what painting provider do you guys are using these?
PPG or Dulux?
PPG,
Yes.
yeah. So we're a lot more like the PPG where we sell through all of these stores
Yes.
rather than us going and apply it. And so that allows us to have a relatively thin sales team
Yeah.
because we put our software with the Eaton charger and
Yes.
the ABB charger and the Wallbox charger.
Yeah.
And then these guys go through all the, there's actually literally an analogy of a paint store. It's called an electrical wholesale supplier.
Right.
And so there's literally electrical stores, just like there's paint stores that all the good contractors go and use. And so we're actually leveraging these channels.
Right.
It's still important to have our very own, our sales team to work with all the distributors.
To help solve their problems.
Help
How's
solve
this
their
work?
problems.
Oh, this how it works.
Totally.
Where does this plug? Or how's the capability? Those sorts of things.
I really believe no matter how big or how small your company is, you have to be hands-on with
Yes.
customers. Even
Yeah.
if you're selling through channel partners, you got to go out to the store.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And like I love that back in the painting business when the reps would, when the corporate reps would come out to the store and say like, hey, how's this product working for you? And we'd tell them.
Yes.
And they'd iterate. So that's what we do. But we don't have an army of salespeople because we have this leveraged, reseller strategy.
Yeah, one of the shared values we have is show, don't tell. Right.
Yeah.
That's something, don't just tell someone, go out, show them, participate. And then as well, that adds to the value of the partnership, adds to the value of the relationship. So one exciting thing as well is total addressable market. So how big do you think this market can be?
Yeah. We believe that there's going to be a huge market for managed EV charging services.
Right.
Today, there's about 50 million EV chargers in the world. And our market right now is only North America.
Right.
But our ambition is to eventually
be
go
worldwide.
global.
Yes.
Yeah. And, if even half of those chargers are connected to a service like ours, at the prices that we build for our service, we get a market that's worth billions of dollars,
Right.
$3, $4, $5 billion per year. But I think what's really exciting is that this is a growth market, right?
Right.
We're at 50 million chargers today. By 2030, we're going to be at 200 million.
Yeah.
And in the long term, I actually think we're going to reach 1 billion EV chargers.
Yeah.
There's about 1 billion vehicles around the world. And this is not going to happen overnight, but we are on I'd call it 30-year journey to electrifying every vehicle.
Yeah.
And it's going to be great for my worldview because we're going to significantly reduce climate, but that's not what's going to push it over the edge. Like EVs are going to be cheaper, faster, have better tech.
Yeah.
And so there's going to become a point where people just, the only reason
Just
to buy a
moving
gas
over.
vehicle is like the same reason you'd buy, like a 69 Mustang, right? Like,
Eventually they're gonna stop making them, right?
Yeah,
like for
totally.
sure. It's like Alkyd Paints was, talking about the paint industry that used to be oil-based paints.
Totally.
They no longer make them, and again, environmentally unfriendly. They've made the latex is better, the technology's better, it's cheaper. Not that we buy it cheaper. It's cheaper for them to make profit. But and what about one concern I have? And again, I'm an environmentalist. I think like really anyone. I shouldn't say, but just hey, we care about the world. What about batteries? Like and the concern about how long do these batteries last, and is that a problem?
Yeah, it's definitely something that needs to be taken into consideration. I think at the end of the day, gas vehicles are so polluting that it's hard to be worse, right?
Right.
Yes, there's a lot of carbon that goes into the manufacturing process and sourcing. There's also a lot of really great initiatives to do cleaner mining and cleaner refining processes. I think it's definitely a consideration, but I think probably the most important thing is how else do we use the batteries other than just to drive us around?
Right.
So right now, our grid is not entirely clean. In Ontario, actually, we're lucky we have nuclear power. It provides most of our power. It's very clean.
Yeah.
But the grid's not entirely clean because we have these what we call coincident peaks, which are usually the hottest days in the summer and the coldest days in the winter when everyone cranks up the heat and it pulls a lot of power off the grid. And a nuclear power plant just you can't flip on an extra nuke.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have these coal and gas power plants that you flip on. But if we could store energy in the batteries of our EVs and then pull it back strategically, we could also eliminate a lot of usage of coal power plants. Is that eliminating the carbon used to produce the battery? No, but it's giving you another way to reduce carbon, which is, hey, I'm just going to pull power from my battery. I'm going to save money, and we're not going to have to turn on the peaker plants. And then the final step is the end of life. After an EV, after a consumer is finished with an electric vehicle, you're going to be able to repurpose those batteries and put them on the grid.
Right.
Because one of the things that the grid is doing is saying, like, look, we have all this excess nuclear power in Ontario.
Yeah.
And this is the same in New York, California, wherever you go. Could we just store it? And it's like, well, there's nowhere to store it. We don't have any batteries. So we got to get millions of EVs on the road. And then 10, 15 years from now, as millions of EVs start coming off the road, let's take out those batteries and put them into grid scale storage facilities. Because actually kind of consumers are the most demanding, right? Like you want your EV to have a long range and things like that. But even when you're done with your battery and you say, this battery is too toast for me, like 80% of that battery can be repurposed for secondary purposes, like grid storage and things like that. And so, it's really reduce, reuse, recycle. Like let's not build more batteries than we need. Let's reuse them and hey, we can use it as a peak shaver. We can pull energy from the batteries, and let's recycle them at the end of the day and put them into other purposes or recycle the raw materials and reuse them.
Right. And just like AI, there's going to be so many more breakthroughs and technological breakthroughs. I know battery saving or energy is on an exponential curve, really improving year over year. That's changing. So I know we're bumping up against your hard stop, Zach. So last question. What would you say to someone who's considering joining StudentWorks and wants to do a startup in the future?
Yeah. So look, the StudentWorks program really set me up phenomenally well to do this. Did it teach me everything? Hell no. Right? In my years as an operator and a coach, I made so many mistakes at StudentWorks, even though I had you as a coach and the other folks in the program.
Exactly.
I still made so many mistakes. I made so many mistakes with this business. So it's not going to teach you everything you need to know, but it's going to give you that huge leg up. I think first of all. Second of all, I do think that the more experience you can have going into starting a tech startup, the better. And you really have to fall in love with the problem.
Yeah.
And I think one of the challenges when I was 18 years old going into StudentWorks and a few years after that starting to think of startup problems is up until your early 20s, your primary role is in the business world, your primary role as a consumer.
Right.
You use Netflix, you use Facebook, you use Instagram. A lot of the most valuable startups are B2B startups.
Right.
But if you're 18, 19, 20, even 22, 23, you don't understand supply chains. You don't know how things get made and how things get sold. And so I would say if you want to start a tech startup, you're in first, second, third year, university, 100% do the StudentWorks program. You can do it for 1 year. You can do it for 5 years.
Right.
But take all of those learnings. And while you're doing that, look at that business. Like where are the inefficiencies in the supply chain of painting? Like we had ex-StudentWorks folks who went and built a great CRM. I think they built a CRM for managing this kind of business. We have other people. I think someone built an app for door-to-door marketing.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
And so go look at the real problems there. But at the same time, focus on hey, if I ever want to start a tech company, I'm gonna have to be really good at selling.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to be really good at recruiting people and convincing them to join my team.
Exactly.
I'm gonna have to be really good at pitching a vision. I'm gonna have to be really good at getting people to trust me when it's tricky. So an investor to invest in you, or a fully grown family to trust you to paint their home when you're in university. Like these are all the things you need to do. And so I think it as far as I'm aware, it's the best program that you could be doing to prepare for that kind of journey.
Yeah, I love just to point at some of those things. It's like becoming a person of high integrity, which you are, and again, you learned, and again, some of it was, you came molded that way. Thanks, mom and dad, and just, good genes and all the good stuff. But then again, learned, hey, Zach was early for our meeting today. Zach's always early. Zach's always on time, high integrity, returns texts and emails like that. That's just who you are. Right.
Absolutely.
And so those things that you just learned. And I loved what you pointed out about just your lack of understandably, right? Like it's of the business to business marketplace, which is some of the biggest businesses in the world. I know I'll talk to students and then remember, oh yeah, they really don't know what Oracle is, or they really, this enormous company, they don't know what that is yet.
Yeah.
And of course they will, and they'll go, oh my gosh, but it's just, hey, I'm 18, 19, 20, and I haven't learned all these things.
Yeah, and it's not that you've been ignorant. It's just your whole experience has been as a consumer,
Yeah.
right? And so the consumers, TikTok very well.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to build TikTok. Like,
Yeah.
There's so many great B2B companies. Chris, it's been great to see Student Works continue to modernize and grow. And like, I love all the content you guys are doing on LinkedIn, and also teaching your operators how to market themselves online. Is so critical. So I think maybe that's the last thing I'd throw in there as well is, do the Student Works program, but while you're there, make sure you're also learning from this digital first strategy, which is I'm posting on LinkedIn, I'm sharing updates.
Yes.
Because, I can tell you the most successful startup founders are also the ones who are savvy with social media, who can tell a story.
Yeah.
So again, continue to be impressed with how you guys adapt the business, how you survive through COVID.
Yeah.
You're a student-driven business that went through, 2 years when every student went home and learned, from their couch. Continued good success and congrats on all of that.
Well, no, thank you so much. And I notice as well, like that's also something I noticed. Like you said, I see because I'm on LinkedIn a lot, and just because that's where our students are, we encourage them to go there and build their brands. And I see you liking other founders. I can tell, oh, there's a friend of Zach's, and I'm supporting them, and they're supporting you, and there's this thing, and that impacts how people look at you. And again, it's future HR people, because good chance, hey, maybe you'll choose a job, maybe you'll be looking for investors, maybe you'll be in this startup. Hey, I'll be the CEO. Next startup, I'm going to be the chief of revenue, right, or the technology officer, right? Like, so often things will change, and again, big part of that is building your brand on LinkedIn.
Totally.
Awesome. Zach, thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris.